Hey, kia ora, it's Bill here. So we're going to have a look at this breadboard, okay? And just to get you started on a few things. So first of all, I recommend getting some pliers because some of these things are really hard to get in and out, okay? And so a pair of fine nose pliers, really easy. You can get these things in and out without too much difficulty, especially if your fingers are a bit big, okay? So now let's just have a look at the breadboard to start with. You'll see that we have these horizontal connections here. Okay, all of these ones here are all connected electrically underneath. Okay, and then there's a little gap, and then all of these ones are connected electrically underneath. So anything we put into these, like these two here, at the moment, they're just connected. Okay, so they're both common, they're both connected to the same point. And generally, we'll think of this blue line as the negative and the red line as the positive. So we've got a negative and a positive here, and we've got a negative and a positive here. At this stage, they're not connected to anything, apart from these ones are connected to themselves, okay? Now then, so what I've done is I'm going to put in 3 switches. I've put in 2 here to start with. So just following exactly the instructions, you'll see that this is wire here, okay? I've got a grey wire, and I'm going to fit it diagonally, okay, from here. Oops. Right, so this is where it gets really fiddly with these things. You can use your fingers, you can use pliers, but I'm going to put it in there, and I'm going to put it in there. Now, sometimes these things are a little bit fiddly to get in, okay? And especially these thin wires, they can bend when you're trying to get them in, okay? So if you're finding that it's not going in very easily, I use one of these sewing pins and just make the hole, that's all you need to do is make the hole the right size, and this will push in nicely, okay? Now, I don't want you to use anything thicker than this because this is the diameter of the wire, okay? So that'll just help you if you find that you're not getting the wire in and it's bending. Okay, so now we're going to put the switch in, and you can see that as I put the switch in, that this side of the switch, this connection here, is connected to the ground line, okay? All right. So that's the first stage, is to get the 3 switches and the 3 wires and so that they're all connected to ground. Now the next stage of the process is to put in some LEDs, okay? So here's some LEDs, right, and I'll put the LEDs in along the top here, okay? And then we're going to put some resistors in here. Now I've specified that you can try with 3 different values of a resistor to start with, and I'll show you why after you've done that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these 3 LEDs in. Now LEDs have to go around the right way, they're polarized. So what I do is when I get an LED and I want to put it in a breadboard like this, unless I really need to keep the legs the right length, what I do is I chop them down in length, okay? But when I cut them, because they come longer than this, when I cut them, I still keep them on the angle, because you'll notice that the 2 LED legs are a different length, okay? The positive one is longer, okay? And so when I cut them, I always cut them on an angle as well, so that I know which one is still the positive. Sometimes you can tell because, and it's really hard to see probably on this video, but one side of this LED has actually got a little flat on it, and that's the negative side, okay? So some LEDs come with that and some don't nowadays. And then when you put it in, the longer leg has to go to this positive line along the top here, this positive rail. We often call it a rail, power supply rail, and it'll just fit in like that, okay? So now you've got your 3 LEDs. The other thing I want you to put in is I want you to put in these 4 wires, okay? So this one's fairly straightforward. Now you've got to get these in exactly the right place, okay? Positive, it's going to come to here, then it's going to come down here and join to this. It's going to connect to this positive, which has got a bend in it, and it's going to come around to this positive. So that means that now that this positive and this positive rail, right, these positive rails are now connected because of this connection, okay? And we're going to actually use our microcontroller to power these switches and LEDs. Now the other thing is, of course, we need a negative, so we need a negative, and it's going to come from here and go to here. Right, now then what to is we get our microcontroller like this, okay? We've got to get it around the right way, and you'll notice that on the microcontroller that one side is labeled 3.3 volts and ground, okay? And so that 3.3 volts and ground, the 3.3 volts and ground, so what I've done is I've lined up the 3.3 volts and ground with this red and the blue here, positive and negative, okay? So this 3.3 volts is going to go in here, and the ground is going to go in here. So that's how our connection's going to be made, 3.3 and ground. So you just line it up like that and then double check. If you've got your wiring right, then pin number or hole number 45 is where your 3.3 volts should be. Now just also lining it up vertically this way, then all your pins are going to be on this most or on this furthest row, right on this edge row, okay? And now up here, that means that you're going to have a blank row. Okay, so this is where you want your blank row to be. And up here, you'll notice that this V in pin is lined up with number 15. Okay, so if you've got everything lined up there properly, these wires here, and got to make sure that the red ones are lined up. The blue one is going into this next column here. Okay, when you've got that, you can just insert it and put it in. Okay, so double check, triple check, quadruple check that all your wiring is correct, and just line it up and just push it into place. Now you'll notice that it's not pushed into place yet. Okay, all it is just sitting in there, so it just easily will come out like this. That means that it's not connected. Okay, so I'm just going to double check that I've got everything in the right place again. Okay, so it's just sitting in there, and then what you've got to do is with your two thumbs, just give it a good push, and it'll push into the board nicely like that. And now it's connected. Later on, I'm going to get you to take it out so you can do some more wiring underneath. Now to take it out, okay, you've got to be quite careful, but it's easy enough to take out. You need to get yourself something flat that will go under this edge, okay? And I'm going to use, for instance, a little screwdriver I've got here, okay? I'm going to put it under that edge. And to get it out, I'm just gonna lift it gently, and I'm only going to lift it just a little bit, okay? So all I've done is just lift it a little bit, so there's a bit of a gap there. I don't want to put too much pressure on one side, because what will happen then is the pins will bend. And then I'm going to put this in the other end, and I'm going to give that just a little gentle lift as well. So now I've lifted both ends away, okay? I've lifted both ends away just a little bit, and then I can do that each side just a little bit more each way like this until it comes out. And now you won't damage it if you're just careful with this, okay? And you don't have to use a screwdriver like this. You can just use something fine that you can get under it with. And then when it's right out, you'll see it'll just lift out nicely, and you won't have bent any of the pins doing that. So that's what I want you to do, okay? So now when you've got that done, you need to put in your 3 resistors, okay? And I've put in I think from memory, a 10 ohm, a 220 ohm, and a 1k ohm. And so we're driving these through the switches and the resistors and the LEDs to make a circuit, okay? And the power for my circuit, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my mini USB here, and I'm going to power it up like this, okay? So what that's doing is actually there's power on the board now, but all we're doing is we're using the 5 volts from your USB. It's converted into 3.3 volts from this little chip here, and the 3.3 volts is now feeding these circuits. So we can just see what the brightness of an LED might be. So that's with a 10 ohm resistor, okay, it's nice and bright. And that's with a 220 ohm resistor, and you can just see it's quite dim. And this one, you can hardly see that one come on at all, but that's with a 1k resistor. Okay, so you can tell that what's happening here is the higher the resistance, the lower the current, okay? So the resistance acts as an impediment to the flow of charge. So that's what we've got. We've got 3.3 volts across a resistor and an LED, and the resistor in this case is 10 ohms, 220 ohms, and 1k. So what that means is that actually I'm going to use 100 ohm resistors for my LEDs in the rest of the projects, okay? So there you go. There's just a simple little introduction, thinking about the breadboard, the connections. What we've made is we've made a circuit, okay? So when I close the switch, the circuit is closed. It goes from one side of the switch, it goes up to, or actually let's think about it in terms of charge flow from positive. So the positive is coming out of our circuit board here on 3.3 volts, and that means that this rail here, this bottom positive rail, is at 3.3 volts. Through those connections we made earlier, that means that this 3.3 volts is also applied to this rail here, okay? And that means that then the charge will flow from the 3.3 volts from the circuit board through this connections here, around through the LED, through the resistor to the switch, and through the switch when it's closed, and then background to ground, which is this blue wire here. So that's how your charge works, okay? Your charge flow. There you go. Hopefully that's a little interesting little introduction to how to put together this circuit in the start. Cheers.